Welcome to the first launch of Tropics for ASTRA. Tropics being a constellation which ASTRA is now being contracted to launch. So it's really good to see ASTRA back to the launch stand after its somewhat tumultuous start so far. And I'm really looking forward to having this be a successful launch. So let's watch along and see what's going on, learn a little bit about the launch vehicle, learn a little bit about ASTRA and its mission, and also about the Tropics mission that is being launched by NASA. So let's get into it. Just to start off here, we are about 20 minutes away from launch, so just keep that in mind. We'll be watching the clock and going to the proper live stream as soon as we get closer to the launch. But first, I kind of want to go into a little bit about what you're going to see in the launch itself, and also a little bit about the mission that, of course, we're about to witness. It's actually really interesting, and if you're into weather or hurricanes and stuff, I really am. It actually affects a little bit it affects a little bit the stuff that I work on, so it's a little bit interesting in that regard. But yeah, let's learn a little bit about what's going on here. So first off, we just want to kind of go through the vehicle, how the vehicle is going to basically get itself into orbit. And basically to do that, it needs to have two stages. So there's the first stage, which is kind of the gray part on the bottom here. And then the second stage, which is kind of contained within the white clamshell that opens up and releases that second stage to go and fly off into orbit. And there's a sequence with how this has to go, of course, right? So in the first part of the sequence, you have what's called MECO, and that's step one. And that's when basically the first stage's engines shut down. And then at step two, you have the deployment of the payload fairing. Those are those two white clamshell features that are going to be flying off. And that's going to be what releases the second stage. And then you can have the third part of the sequence, which is to release that second stage and allow that rocket to ignite and send it off onto orbit. And I have a little bit of an animation that kind of depicts that. So you can see here that once the fuel runs out, you have the MECO event. And then once that's finished, you're going to be able to deploy the payload fairing. And that'll be called fairing deployment. And then finally, once that's done, the second stage will be able to be ejected from the vehicle, which will allow it to then ignite the engine a couple seconds later, allowing it to eventually take on off into orbit. So that's just a little bit about how the sequence of events are going to happen, and as we're watching them, because when that part comes about 3 minutes after the launch of the rocket, everything's going to happen kind of really fast, and they're going to be switching between camera views. So this kind of helps you to think about what's happening and look at what you're seeing and see it from the context of what you should expect to see. Yeah, it's also important to note that usually their coverage is kind of a little bit choppy at that point. So if something kind of weird happens, you kind of have to wait a little bit before you can really understand what's actually happened. So be sure not to freak out too soon. So that's kind of how the vehicle is going through its process of getting the payload into orbit and the main parts you're going to see. The next part I want to go over is kind of a little bit about the Tropics mission itself. So here's a picture of the satellites. You can see them here. Basically, this is planned to be a constellation of 6 satellites, and they're going to launch them 2 at a time. So there should be 3 launches in total. They should happen over the next month or 2. That's kind of the plan, is to deploy them relatively rapidly. And so each mission will take 2 of these satellites, and they're putting them into very specific orbits, which allow them to be able to monitor the Earth's weather, and more specifically, things like hurricanes. And of course, hurricanes happen kind of near the equator, so these satellites are also going to be traveling in that region with an inclination of about 30 degrees. So this will basically take them between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and they'll just kind of oscillate in kind of a S-like pattern as they orbit around the Earth, around those altitudes. And the reason why they want to have 6 of them is so that they kind of have full coverage of the Earth. And basically at any given time, there should always be a satellite that's within 1 hour of passing over a region of interest. So one of the problems with one of the problems with weather satellites today is that you might get a pass over an interesting region, but then you won't get another satellite passing over for like a couple of hours, and things will happen and change, and you won't know what happened or what caused it. So this will be an opportunity to have better observations of these storms and get better understandings of why they intensify and kind of where they're moving and stuff. So that's kind of the key advantage here about this satellite constellation, is mainly just because of the more focused coverage of that equatorial region. And then, yeah, if you're interested in what's actually causing the satellite to work and stuff, here's what the insides of it look like. All the stuff on the left-hand side here is basically the stuff that makes the satellite stay in orbit, and you know, the battery, the radio, gyroscopes, controllers, a bunch of sensors on the back there that allow it to orient properly with the Earth, and also it has a bunch of reaction wheels which allow it to reorient itself so that it's always pointing the right way. And it's only the top third part, that part in the gray there, that little gray cube, that's actually the payload for the mission that's actually going to be doing the monitoring. And what that thing is a microwave radiometer. And what does that really mean? Well, basically it's reading the radiation that comes off of the Earth, more specifically the cloud layer, and it can tell basically how hot it is. Everything gives off electromagnetic waves, specifically in the microwave region, for things that are basically the same, as hot as the Earth is. So it's basically reading that and telling us interesting information about the intensity of the storms. And what that kind of looks like is it'll give you like pictures like this one, where you can see basically what's happening inside of the clouds just by looking at the heat that's coming off of them. So it's actually a really interesting way to observe storm behavior. And then you can end up generating maps that look like this. And you probably are familiar with this when it comes to the weather section of a news report, because they'll have images like this that basically show the heat that's coming off of these cloud layers. So yeah, that's a little bit about the mission and what's going on. So it's definitely an interesting concept for how to better monitor the weather and to get better ideas about what's happening inside of hurricanes, and essentially get us to a place where we can predict and understand their behavior in a much better way, which will always be better, especially if you're someone who lives in the south. This is obviously really important to you. For people like me who live in Germany, maybe not so impactful to my life. I don't think Germany has ever been in a hurricane, but you never know. Global warming is coming, right? All right, just switching over to the mainstream here. We are at 15 minutes to launch, and it looks like we're in a hold. So let's check to see what's going on there.
Per step 69, Delphin, can you confirm the Delphin system looks ready for launch?
I think the hold's been going on for about 3 minutes.
Confirms. Good for launch.
Step 70, Orbit, can you confirm the Ether is ready for launch?
Ether's ready for launch.
Tango, in machine Aux 1 ISO control, set high pressure target to 90 psi.
Aux 1 ISO control, high pressure target, 90, enter.
So they're just going through the pre-launch check right now.
Step 72, Tango, verify vehicle looks okay for launch aside from tank levels and pressures.
Inward.
And that means that they're ready to go, except for the filling, of course, which is not quite completed.
And step 73, GNC, confirm wind profiles are still acceptable for launch at this time.
Confirmed.
We do need to look out for the storm clouds that are potentially coming in.
This takes us to our water test, step 74. Tango, in Water 1 water system, toggle prime to true to begin flowing water up to the deluge system.
Water 1 water system, prime to true. Path open.
You see those clouds there on the bottom? That's the water system that's being tested right now. basically this is what helps to dampen out
So while
the.
teams are working to resolve this hold at T-minus 15 minutes, and again, we'll provide updates as soon as we have them, we do have a couple more questions coming in, so let's start with this one from Don, which asks, what is the thrust of this rocket, Amanda?
So the first stage of the rocket has a total combined thrust of 32,500 pounds to lift us up from the launch pad, and then our upper stage has 740 pounds of thrust.
And what fuel combination is producing that thrust?
Yeah, so we use the same type of fuel propellant on both the first stage and the upper stage, and so that is a combination of liquid oxygen and RPX, which is a highly refined form of kerosene.
Gotcha.
So basically, we're going to be in a hold here until they resolve their issue, and they'll continue going through various tests of the system. This is another breakdown of the launch vehicle in terms of its component parts here, and you can basically see the first stage there at the bottom on the left, and then the second stage is there on the right, which basically comes out of that payload fairing that you see on the sides there.
Bay is some thermal protection, mostly just to protect the engine controllers and onboard computers from the high heat environment during launch. Moving towards the forward end, you see the large cylindrical section there, which is the first stage propellant storage. And so that is a fully welded structure that's fabricated here in-house in Alameda. All those sheet metal components arrive as rolled sheets of aluminum, and our first stage production technicians perform a longitudinal friction stir weld up each seam before sequentially joining each one together via circumferential TIG welding operations. And that is how it forms the fuel and liquid oxygen tank. And you can actually see some really great videos and images of our team at work on these exact operations by searching #FactoryFriday on LinkedIn to see some of our posts. And although the tank looks like one large volume, it is actually split into two separate tanks. One is for the RPX, which is that highly refined form of kerosene, and that one sits closest to the engine bay, and then liquid oxygen. And you can see the delineation line between the two as the liquid oxygen tank forms that thin layer of frost on the exterior due to the cryogenic fluids inside. And so you can see that on the live video feed of the rocket over on the right-hand side there. Continuing our way towards the forward end, that conical section is called the inner stage. And that's what houses many of our onboard avionics components. There's radar on there, antenna, even some cameras that look down the length of the first stage during flight. And again, this is a fabricated sheet metal assembly, and it does have additional structural supports in there, as that is how the upper stage is secured to the first stage during flight. And that takes us to the upper stage, which is that assembly that looks like stacked spheres on this far right side of the image. The upper stage also uses RPX and liquid oxygen as its main propellants, and that one has a single engine, which is pressure fed and can provide 740 pounds of thrust. The upper stage gets nestled into the inner stage during flight until main engine cutoff, when the first stage releases the upper stage for its final segment of flight. And if you look back at the first stage tank, you can see on the LOX dome those fingers that are sticking out. Those fingers actually do help to support the upper stage engine during the high vibrations during the first stage portion of the flight. And then lastly, we have the fairings, which are those two clamshell structures that go around the upper stage and payload and protect it during flight. And then those will pop open just after main engine cutoff for release of the upper stage. And then if you do see on the right-hand image, the the inner stage and fairings are also white, but that is not due to the similar frosty effect of the liquid oxygen tank. Those have a thermal protection on them to protect the payload from the aerodynamic heating that is caused by the compression of air as the vehicle moves through the atmosphere. So that is Rocket 3. Overall, we're able to deliver 25 to 150 kilograms to a 500-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit with this vehicle. And a majority of these parts are produced here in-house in Alameda. I would absolutely love to give shout-outs to every one of the technicians and engineers that help us build these vehicles. Yeah, we are on the clock this morning, so as I mentioned, please take a look at #FactoryFriday on our social media sites, where you can see some of our technicians at work building all the various structures of this vehicle. And if you've not also seen it before, please be sure to check out the factory tour that NASA Spaceflight took with our Vice President of Operations, Bryson Gentile, last year. It's a great look at some of the incredible things our production teams are building here in Alameda.
So that was a pretty good overview of the systems on the ASTRA vehicle, Rocket 3. But maybe another interesting thing is that they have just announced that they're going to be actually developing a new rocket called Rocket 4. And why they're doing this is not totally entirely clear, but it is good that they are still thinking about the future and trying to develop new products. So what are the differences between Rocket 3, which we just learned about here, and Rocket 4 in the future? And they plan to actually have this Rocket 4 flying in the near-term future. So here's a quick overview of the two vehicles themselves. So the Rocket 4 is basically just a little bit larger than Rocket 3. And here you can see the differences in the height and diameter and stuff. One of the key differences will be actually the diameter. So the diameter of the fairing of Rocket 4 is actually about a third larger than Rocket 3. And that really helps them to be able to accommodate higher volume payloads if they need to. And it's also going to be a longer fairing as well. So they're basically, I would say, almost quadrupling their volume that they can contain, which is really helpful in terms of delivering more payloads together at once, or even just less dense payloads, shall we say. They're going to be increasing their payload capacity by about 150 kilograms from the 150 that you just heard about for Rocket 3 to 300 kilograms. How useful this is questionable, but the reason why I'm a little bit confused by this choice is because the main feature that they claim to say is that they give dedicated rides to specific orbits, just like these Tropics satellites, which are going specifically to 30 degrees. 30 degrees is a really weird inclination to go to in orbit in general. Usually payloads are either going to geostationary orbit, or they go into sun-synchronous orbit, or into some other elliptical type of orbit, but they usually don't go into these circular 30-degree orbits. That's like a really strange orbit to go into. And so ride sharing on another vehicle would actually not really be a good idea for these payloads. And that's where Rocket 3 comes in, because it can just take the payloads directly to the place they want to go, and they don't have to worry about making the satellite bigger so it can do maneuvers on orbit and get into the right place that it wants to go. And that actually makes it a very cheap and usable system. But Rocket 4 would kind of need to have multiple satellites on it to make it make sense. So then you're going back to kind of the rideshare thing. So this is why I'm a bit confused about their choice to go with Rocket 4. But the one thing that is clear about Rocket 4 is it is actually cheaper per kilogram to orbit. Obviously, you see that the cost is 3.9 million versus a 2.5 million for Rocket 3. So it's less than twice the cost. So in the end, it does get lower cost per kilogram to orbit. So that could be part of the reason why they're choosing to go down this route. But we'll see if that's really what the market wants. So it looks like we're still in this 15-minute hold here. Not really sure exactly what the issue is yet. They do have a bit of a long launch window available to them, so they don't have to instantaneously launch. And that's just because it's going into basically this 30-degree inclined orbit, and this is the first one to go up, so it doesn't have a specific window of where it needs to be. It's not like they'll have to rendezvous with the space station or something. That's usually when you need to have these instantaneous launch windows. It's when you have a very specific orbit you have to get into, or you have a target you need to dock with or something, like at the International Space Station.
This is ASTRA flight on countdown. We have cleared the final clear to launch pole. New T0 is 1612 UTC. Step 80 Tango in AB1 managed power systems. Toggle ground power system authority to true.
Ground power system authority true.
Here we go. We're back on
AB1
track
managed
now.
polling. Toggle do both ground and guidance polling to true.
Do both ground and guidance true.
GNC, do you require an additional self-test at this time?
Yes, please.
In VB1, turn on off PDBs. Tango, please toggle GNC self-test to true. GNC, call out upon completion.
Wilco.
GNC self-test started.
So clearly something was up with the GNC, which stands for Guidance, Navigation, and Control. Obviously a really important system. Without it, the rocket goes in random directions. But good to see that we're back on track here with the countdown. I guess they can continue with the loading of the rockets. One thing to note is those vapor clouds that are coming off the rocket right now. There's nothing wrong there. That's just the rocket venting oxygen. So
GNC self-test passed.
Copy. FTS, can you confirm that the FTS is still enabled?
So that's about the.
Copy. Tango in Fuel 4 operate. Please toggle full and fast to true.
For operate full, true.
So they were just verifying the FTS was still armed, and what that is the flight termination system, which is required in case there's something wrong with the vehicle and it has issues with guidance, and then it flies somewhere it's
Alright,
not
so
supposed
as you
to.
may have just heard, we have a new T0. The countdown has resumed. Just under 11 minutes to go. The new T0 is 9:12 a.m. Pacific time or 12:12 p.m. Eastern time, 16:12 UTC. The range has cleared that boat in the hazard area, and everything now on track for launch in just under 11 minutes. So we should be now coming up on the go, no-go poll for today's flight. So let's go ahead and listen into the countdown as the teams work through the final 10 minutes of the count.
So there was a boat in the way, a boat in the way of the clear zone. That's why we had the hold.
Please set to idle.
Setting to idle.
You would think
Please,
that.
please set Fuel 4 operate to idle. Or sorry, stand by on that one. Please make sure pump battery 2, manage pump battery charge is in idle.
We did a video previously on why rocket launches get delayed, so I'll put a link to it here in case you're interested. Basically, boats getting in the way of rockets is one of actually the main reasons why they can get delayed. Unfortunately, you would think that they would have like rules in the maritime to stop this from happening, but boats somehow still always get in the way. But now they're just going to be going through the no-go poll here, making sure that the vehicle is still ready to go for the new
Tango
time.
in 0, machine activator, toggle launch machines to true.
Zero machine activator, launch machines to true.
Tango, activate launch machine.
Launch machine is active.
Toggle locks topping to true.
Lock stopping, true.
This takes us to step 90. This is the poll for tank pressurization and launch. Payload. Please confirm there are no concerns for flight and that the payload is ready.
Payload ready.
Copy. ASTRA team, after this point, any system issue must be called as a hold on the countdown net. If there are no concerns for flight, call go, otherwise no go. Red lead.
Red lead is go.
FTS.
FTS is go.
GNC.
GNC is go.
Athena.
Go.
FAO.
FAO is go.
CDH.
CDH is go.
Tango.
Tango is go.
ASTRA safety.
Safety is go.
Flight is also go.
Sounds like a go, guys.
Tango, verify that the vehicle still looks ready for launch aside from tank press and final topping.
Confirmed. LCCs are met.
Another reason why they probably had an issue with that boat is because they're actually launching from the Cape this time and not from Kodiak, Alaska, which is usually where they launch the Astra vehicle from. And the reason for that is that because they need to go into this 30-degree orbit, it's actually impossible to get into a 30-degree orbit from Alaska because of how high north it is. So they have to be a little further south so that they can actually achieve this orbit. So now that we're fully a go, the rocket should be ready to take off in just under 7 minutes here. Watching from your backyard. Wow. You have a great backyard if you're watching from the backyard. I wish my backyard opened up onto the Space Launch Complex in Florida. That'd be wonderful. So really jealous that you can watch from your backyard. But the reason why they're going into this, they're launching from the Cape this time and not from Alaska is, as I said before, it's because of the launch inclination. And in order to get into that launch inclination from Alaska, they would have to do a crazy inclination modification that they just don't have the delta V to achieve. So that's why they have these multiple launch locations where they can go from, so that if they have to go into a slightly shallower launch inclination like they do in this case, they can still achieve that. And also, it puts on a nice show for people in different places in the world. So that's always fun. They've actually secured a launch site in Europe, actually, just recently, at the UK spaceport in Saxiford. I don't know if you know about this launch site, but it is a new one that's coming online next year. And this is going to be a good opportunity for Astra to get more of those higher inclination orbits achieved. It's kind of similar to their launch site in Alaska, but I assume they're going to probably service more European payloads at that location. So that'll also be interesting to see. Some launches finally from the UK, which hasn't seen orbital launches in like a really long time. I think it goes back to like the 1980s when they last had one.
A little bit about why mission control here in Alameda looks a little different today?
Yeah, so our mission control has gotten an upgrade. A lot of that is trying to improve our operational efficiency and streamline our processes. It used to take 6+ team members, and now we've gotten that down to our 4 key team members in the mission control pod. And these pods are portable as well, so we can perform mission control from anywhere that we need to.
That's awesome.
This is really amazing. So they only have 4 people that run the entire mission for the rocket. If you're used to like the big room with like 50 people in it, Astra takes a different philosophy to that whole approach. Which is part of the reason probably why they're able to actually achieve a launch for such a low cost, which is just 2.5 million, which makes them the cheapest launch vehicle that currently exists in the world today. So that makes them, again, a great competitive advantage that they have over a lot of other launch vehicles that could really make them the go-to launch vehicle for small satellites, which is, I think, basically their mission, is to be that. They want to steal the rug out from under Electron.
Telemetry recorders are running.
Copy, thank you. And reminder to control room, if you require RF data, be prepared to switch over your pages at liftoff.
All right, we're coming up on the final countdown here. So you'll see those clouds coming off the vehicle all the way right up to the launch, and that's because they're filling with liquid oxygen. And liquid oxygen is at like minus 180 degrees Celsius. So it's constantly boiling off as it absorbs heat from the environment. So you have to keep letting it out, otherwise it could build up pressure and blow up the tank. The launch site from the UK, it's called Saxiford.
Reminder to all that any 3-word hold from here on out is
S-A-X-A-F-O-R-D.
regardless of source.
Or
And MECO, please be prepared to issue option
I think
when
it's
rocket
V-O-R-D.
IIP marker passes.
This is a launch site
and
that's basically is coming online soon, and it's going to offer lots of different vehicles access to space. But I think Astra is the first one that's officially signed a contract with them to go orbital, and that's actually existing right now. There are also a couple other launch vehicles that are going to launch from there that are in the small sat market, but they haven't had a successful launch yet. But that should change in the coming future. There are a couple of launch sites in the UK that are also coming online, so this is just one of them. There's also one that's coming online with Skyrora, which is another UK launch provider. And there's also another one called Spaceport One, which is also going to be providing orbital access to space and suborbital access. And these are actually the spaceports that we are looking to. Oh, uh-oh. I think we have a hold. Let's listen in. They're still running the clock, so not sure. Maybe I heard something wrong. Hold is not the words you want to say accidentally in the last minute of the countdown. Yeah, I think they're going to.
Okay, so as you may have just
down.
heard, a hold was called on the countdown net, so we're going to stand by for another update to see what the issue the teams may be working is. We'll provide that update as soon as we have it, but again, the count has entered a hold.
Again, they do have time to reset if they do have to hold here, and that's because, of course, they're going into an orbit that is not specific. But we'll see what the issue was. But yeah, regarding back to the UK launch sites again, there are lots of new ones that are popping up in the coming years in Europe in general. So should be really interesting and exciting for the future of European launches and launch providers. And nice to see ASTRA get in on the action too. Of course, I'm from a student group called ASTRA, which is in Bremen, which is kind of why we stream these launches, just because we're all ASTRA fans. We are also going to be trying to launch at one of those UK launch ports. They're both of them, the Saxford one and the Spaceport one, are both options for us to potentially launch our rocket, which will go to the Kármán line. Not all the way to orbit like the professional rockets do, but we just want to get into space. This is a common target for university student groups, and there's only one other group in the world that's achieved it, and we want to get the Europeans on that board as well, because it's an American group that got there first, based out of California. Hopefully we get an update relatively soon on what's going wrong here. All the fueling systems seem to be working correctly, so I don't think it's anything to do with that. It's probably some sort of technical glitch with the communication or the avionics. This is the struggle with relatively newer rockets, is that they always have little things that come up in the countdowns that maybe are not as usual or expected, and then it usually results in this. If you watch like a Falcon 9 launch or a, one of these systems, like they just they've launched that thing so many times, they know exactly what happens every time, right? So they hardly ever have folds for technical reasons. But ASTRA is still a new rocket company relatively, so they're still going through these processes of learning all the things that can happen on their rocket system. And it's probably a lot of work for just those 4 people in the control room. Like, I'm quite impressed by how lean their operation is in general. Usually launch operations are like a big part of the cost of launching a rocket. They can sometimes run up to even hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. But of course, if you keep your operation light and lean with only 4 people in the control room, it gets a lot cheaper. If you have any questions about the ASTRA launch vehicle or the mission in general, do feel free to drop any questions you have. It looks like we might be here for a couple more minutes at least before we get any information about what's going on. I suspect at this point they're probably going to choose to delay till tomorrow. I don't know exactly how long their launch window was. I think it was like a couple hours, but they might still have an opportunity to reset. We'll see. Come on, ASTRA. What is the issue? They seem to still be filling it, so until they start detanking, then I would say it's still a go. Once they detank, then you know, it's definitely going to be delayed. One of the things that can that tells you for sure that, of course, they're still filling the rocket is these clouds that you see coming off the vehicle, and the fact that the top half of the first stage is still white. That means that there's liquid oxygen in the tank, and they're still gearing up to basically launch the rocket. So yeah, Transcendence. That's the rocket that we're developing, the student group, ASTRA. How much will the launch cost? It's going to be a lot. It's not going to quite be 2.5 million like a launch of a professional rocket, but right now we're anticipating that the actual launch campaign itself will probably cost around 100,000 euros. That's just for the couple of days that you're on site to actually physically perform the launch itself. And we also anticipate that we'll probably end up spending 100,000 or 100 to 200,000 euros developing the rockets and performing the testing and stuff. And that's with 100% free labor. So no one, of course, no one gets paid. If we were paying the engineers, it would probably be even more costly. But yeah, in the end, to build a vehicle that can get to the Kármán line and get to space is actually quite expensive. It's not to be taken up by the faint of heart, so to say. And it definitely takes a lot of time and energy as well. So yeah, you have to have a lot of people working on it and a lot of people dedicated to it.
We
and
do
really
have an update for you. We are still holding to complete final locks conditioning, and so once that is complete, we will likely get a new T0 time shortly from Mission Control for you.
Yeah, we'll keep the updates coming again as soon as we have them, everyone. Holding at T-minus 31 seconds, expecting a recycle for a new T0 shortly. Also, in the meantime, while we wait for that recycle, we'll go ahead and take some more questions. First off, I'll just start with one off the screen.
So it sounds like they're going to recycle, but they'll give us that recycle time once they fully figure out what's going on and have an official time for it. Yeah. Just to confirm, it's not the ship this time. So you see that ship in the background? It's kind of cruising by slowly. No, that's not the issue. It's not actually in the way of the rocket. But yeah, a little bit weird that they have a boat so close to the launch site. Usually that wouldn't be what you would expect. But it's not that ship in the background that's causing this delay. So just to clear those thoughts. Yeah, just to finish what I was saying there about Transcendence. Yeah, it's going to be something that's going to be on the order of 200 to 300,000 euros in total at the end, once we have everything said and done. So, yeah, if you want to help us out with getting those costs covered a little bit, of course you can go ahead and go to our website. We have a donate page that you can go to there. Also, wait a second, what are we looking at here?
Orbital inclination relative to the equator.
Gotcha.
So that what you see on screen there, that's the basically the launch corridor that the vehicle is going to go down, and that's the entire area that has to be clear in order to make sure that there's no conflict with any vessels or anything. So basically, the entire area to the east of the coast has to be clear, because they're launching almost directly east to get into this 30-degree inclination orbit, and that's just because Cape Canaveral is located at about 23 degrees, so they almost have to go straight east in order to get into that 30-degree inclination they want. But yeah, the camera's looking south, so the cruise ship is not in the way. We can confirm that. Yeah, as I was saying before, with Transcendence, you can go to the website and you can donate if you would like to support us. But you can also check out our merch store, where we have some stuff that you can buy that has all the Astra insignias on it. This is one of the things, the Astra t-shirt. But we also have sweatshirts and water bottles, hats, all kinds of stuff. So I'll put a link to the description, to the website and to the merch store in the description if you're interested in checking that out as well. Yeah, every little bit helps. So yeah, if you want to have some cool stuff with our stuff on it, we'd love to have that.
While we wait for another update on this hold, again, hoping that it'll clear soon, but we're going to go ahead and take a break and wait for another update. We'll provide that as soon as we have it.
So yeah. I think they're probably going to recycle because they still haven't detanked the vehicle. So I would say we still should look forward to another launch coming up here. Maybe we can go through the staging sequence one more time, just so that we're, in case there are some new people that joined the stream in between, before I did it all at the start. So just to go over it again, basically the bottom half of the vehicle is the first stage. That's the part here that's in gray. It's not actually gray in the real world. You can see that the top half of that gray, what should be gray, is white. That's only because the liquid oxygen is actually causing ice to basically freeze onto the side of the wall and is making it look white. But if it were not to have liquid oxygen in it, it would be gray. So that's the first stage, and that's going to basically push the vehicle all the way up into space. And once that runs out of fuel, it's going to shut down the engines, and that's going to be MECO. Then those payload fairings are going to basically open up and allow the second stage to be able to come out and ignite its engine and carry the vehicle on its way into orbit. Of course, to get into orbit, you have to go really, really fast sideways. It's not just about getting into space. And so basically the first stage gets you into space, the second stage, that takes you into orbit. And you can kind of see an animation of the sequence here. So you see the engine run out, you come to the MECO condition, then those payload fairings are going to deploy, and that's what allows that second stage to be able to leave from the first stage. That's the second stage ejection. And then finally you'll have that engine turn on and carry the payload all the way into orbit. And that first stage is just going to basically come back down. It's not going to land itself or anything, so it's not like the Falcon 9. It's just going to crash into the ocean and become, fish food. Fortunately, this isn't really the best and most efficient way to deal with rocketry, of course, but when you're at these small scales, the Astra vehicle is just launching a couple 100 kilograms into low Earth orbit, so it's not really having the fuel reserves in order to perform an actual landing or something. So that's why they just basically dispose of the first stage. There's only one vehicle that's kind of starting to be able to reuse itself at this scale, which is the Electron. The Electron's a little bit bigger than Astra's rocket though, and it's just barely able to do this. And it doesn't actually land with rockets like the Falcon 9, it gets caught by a helicopter. So it kind of needs an extra step to pull that off. But the thing that makes the Astra's rocket a lot cheaper is that they're not actually using high performance materials and stuff. So the Electron rocket, which is Rocket Lab's small satellite launcher, it uses carbon fiber for most of its structure, and it's really well designed in a way where it can get the most amount of payload into orbit for the least massive vehicle. Astra's kind of gone the other way and saying hey, we can build kind of a bigger vehicle, that's fine. We're not going to use high performance materials or anything, we're just going to use steel and aluminum and stuff, and we'll make it really cheap. And that's basically what they have here. But the problem with that is that, well, of course, you don't really have any margins left to do that kind of a recovery. So we'll see which philosophy is more efficient in the end, I guess. But on the surface, right now, Astra offers their launch for about 1/3 the price of an Electron launch. So on that price point right there, they're already looking quite favorable. So we'll have to see if Electron's able to reduce their costs in competition with Astra by performing those reuses. But that's something that will develop over the next couple of years. By then, I'm sure Astra will start maybe experimenting with recovery. Maybe that's what Rocket 4 is about. If that's what it really was about, was that they want to be able to build a rocket which can eventually recover itself, then I'm a big fan. Then I'm a big fan of Rocket 4, and they should put all their energy into it, and that should be what they do in the future. But I'm not really sure that's actually their intention. That's never really been their philosophy. This is quite the hold. Yeah, I would say it's probably something technical. They wouldn't be holding this long if it was just like a small glitch. I'm worried that the weather will start to become an issue because they said that there were some thunderstorms that were coming in right after their targeted launch window, which would be, right around now. So hopefully they don't troubleshoot this issue all the way into the next issue, which would be the weather. Although from my perspective, it seems like those thunderclouds are not too threatening. They seem pretty gentle. But maybe we just can't see the problematic side of the weather here. One question that might be interesting is what all those cords and umbilicals are that are going. They seem to be going into the rocket at various places, and there are basically two things that those umbilicals are trying to achieve. First of all, you need to kind of have a link to the payload and the avionics that are inside of the rocket. That's kind of like the black cord that you see that's going up into the basically the payload part of the rocket there. So they need to maintain that connection, sometimes for various purposes. But also, the other purpose that they have for these umbilicals is actually just to fuel the vehicle itself.
Okay, so as you can see, we're still holding here. We're waiting for this hold to be resolved. But Amanda, I do believe we have an update regarding the weather for today's attempt.
Yeah, so we have recently heard from the range that we are good for another 20 minutes. After then, the weather will become too difficult for us to be able to likely proceed with today's launch.
Yeah, so we'll keep an eye on that, but it looks like we've got at least another 20 minutes to go. So hopefully, if this recycle can occur a little bit quickly, we should still have another chance to launch today. So again, keeping an eye on that, and we'll provide more updates as we have them, as they continue to work this LOX conditioning issue. In the meantime, I think the audio cut out earlier, so I want to ask this question again. Earlier, we had that hold at T-minus 15 minutes. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that was the hold point?
Right, yeah, so the T-minus 15 mark is when we enter our terminal count, and that is a really important milestone. That's when we can start to transfer the control over to the vehicle. That's also where we would likely revert back to in case of a recycle. And another key milestone is at approximately 10 minutes from liftoff, where we perform the go pull for launch and tank pressurization. And then at 6 minutes is when the range provides the authorization to launch.
Gotcha.
So, what is the task of this rocket? Just to reiterate, the basic task is to move the Tropics satellites, there's 2 of them that are in this payload, into a low Earth orbit, which is at a 30-degree inclination and 600 kilometers of altitude. And the reason why and this is basically it's a NASA mission, by the way. So the Tropics mission is 6 satellites, and here I have a view of them here. So they kind of look like this right here, and it's going to be 6 of them in total, which are going to circle the Earth. And their job is to monitor the extreme weather like hurricanes and typhoons, specifically for information about their developments and how they change over time. The unique advantage that these 6 satellites will have is that they're able to have rapid recycle times between viewing the one specific spot on the Earth. So, for instance, if a satellite flies over a hurricane at 1 minute, literally less than an hour later, another satellite will come by and be able to fly over. And this allows them to be able to get really good data out of this and be able to really monitor weather on a constant basis, specifically these cyclone stuff that's happening near the equator. They couldn't really do this with the weather satellites that are available today, because usually when they fly over, they don't have like a refly over time for many, many hours. And that was kind of creating problems with monitoring these systems, because if you all of a sudden have a gap where you don't have any information for like half a day, you're not really able to properly predict where that storm is going or what's happening, or even understand why rapid changes occur with that storm. So that's kind of the purpose that the Tropics mission has. And of course, ASTRA's job today is to launch that satellite into orbit. So yeah, we'll see here if it's going to be able to do that. It doesn't have to launch today, so it could be that they will decide to push till tomorrow. It's looking a bit more like that might be the case, because they said the weather is going to turn bad in about 20 minutes. It's probably only like 15 minutes now. And they usually need about 15 minutes to do a proper recycle, because they go back to the 15-minute count point where they usually will hold to make sure everything's okay, and then go through their go, no-go poll again. So they need at least some minutes to do that. But yeah, here, let's listen into this is some footage of the factory and where they make the rockets and stuff. And it's pretty crazy they can just stick this into an 18-wheeler. They literally take the rocket out of the 18-wheeler and just set it up on the pad. It's pretty crazy.
So again, that's how the rocket got here, and of course there was a static fire test prior to the launch attempt, and today's launch attempt is currently in a hold. We're waiting for another update on this LONGS conditioning issue. Once that hold clears, there'll be a recycle point and a new T0. So once we get a little bit more information and an update on that, we'll go ahead and come back, but let's go ahead and take a break, and we will come back to you with more information as soon as we have it. Again, stick with us.
So we are, of course, still in the hold. Yeah, we'll see what happens here. I think they might still recycle, but it's going to be dependent on the weather, because they did say that there's going to be, the weather is probably going to go into a no-go condition in about 15 minutes. So if they don't decide to recycle this relatively soon, I suspect they're probably going to stand down for the day. Yeah, no need to risk the chance of having a bad launch because of weather. One interesting thing to think about is, like, why does weather even affect a rocket in the first place? Like, if you think about what's happening with a rocket, it's flying at like multiple times the speed of sound. It's, you know, made out of these materials that are super advanced, usually, although Astra's maybe not so much. It's just steel and aluminum and stuff, but still, like, pretty strong stuff. Like, why would some wind or some, you know, clouds be an issue for a rocket? Well, basically there are two things that rockets are usually sensitive to. Number one, like I said before, is the wind. The reason for that is that when the rocket is actually flying through the atmosphere in the higher levels of the atmosphere, it's not really going that fast yet. It's only going like around the speed of sound. And the crosswinds that are created because of the intersection with the jet stream can sometimes be enough to like push the rocket into an angle where it can structurally actually damage itself. So that's one reason why you can be delayed for weather. Yeah, the timer is stuck at 31 seconds because we are still in the hold. So it's not a problem with the timer or anything. It's just that they're in a hold, and they'll probably recycle that back to either 15 minutes or 10 minutes if they do decide to do a recycle. Yeah, so we're still waiting to see if they have information on that and whether that will happen, and when it does, they'll update the timer accordingly. The other reason why the rockets tend to get delayed for weather is because of like lightning and stuff, and lightning isn't necessarily immediately dangerous to a rocket. Like, the rockets have been hit by lightning in the past with, you know, minimal affecting of the systems. But there's two things that could happen with lightning. Number one, you could damage some avionics and some electronics in your payload. Usually they're relatively well shielded though, because they have the payload fairing around it and the whole body of the rocket. So typically the pulse of the energy just goes like right through the structure of the rocket. So typically it's not too much of an issue in that respect if that happens. But the other issue that might happen is if you have like any sort of leaking propellant or oxidizer or something, or venting happening, it could happen that the like lightning itself will actually cause an propellant to ignite and cause an explosion. So yeah, that's not as good. So yeah, in order to avoid those things and prevent there being any issues with the rocket, and that because of that, they usually will stand down for these types of reasons. However, there have been, like I said before, there have been rockets that have been hit by lightning and done just fine. One of them was actually Apollo 12. It was hit by lightning right at the start of the launch, and NASA had a little bit of a scare where they were worried, like, oh my god, what's going to happen? And then, oh, well, rocket had no problem. Kept flying to space, no problem. So, yeah. But usually they like to play it safe, you know, make sure there's not going to be a problem. Yep. Not sure if we're going to be able to see the launch today. Because they still haven't reset the time, and that weather window is starting to creep up on us relatively quickly now. Maybe they just reset to 5 minutes though, I don't know. But usually they do reset to either 15 or 10. Because they usually want to do the go no go poll, and that always happens at 10 minutes. Yeah, ASTRA's usually a bit notorious for not really sharing what's happening during their holds and stuff. But that's because they only have 4 people inside of the mission control, right? They're all fully focused on trying to solve the problem. The question was, where is the smoke coming out of the bottom? So yeah, that's not actually smoke. It's just the condensation of water because of the release of oxygen from the tank. So because we're still fueling the vehicle, which leads me to think that they're probably still planning to recycle, the vehicle can't keep the liquid oxygen inside of the tank forever, because basically it's at minus 180 degrees Celsius, so it's a cryogenic fluid, and the environment is going to be slowly heating it up, and causing it to evaporate. And if you just fill the tank without letting any of it out, that will build up pressure higher until eventually, the pressure is too much for the tank, and then the tank explodes. So in order to prevent this, you actually have to vent some of that oxygen from the tank in order to keep the pressures relatively low. And when you vent that oxygen, it's like really cold, so immediately all the water out of the air condenses, and then you get basically this smoke trail that comes out off the rocket. So usually when you see that, it just means that they're still actively filling the tank. The other indicator, of course, being that the top half of the first stage is white, which is basically caused because ice is condensation is happening on the booster because of the liquid oxygen that's right there, like minus 180 degrees Celsius, and it forms ice on the side. Yeah, so the launch window is not really critical on this rocket because it's the first of the 6 satellites going into that orbit. It basically means that it can kind of launch whenever it wants, kind of. It doesn't have a specific window, so it has like a big range of times that it could launch at. I think their launch window today is basically a 2-hour launch window, if I'm not mistaken. But the problem right now is that they have weather that is going to be an issue in about 10 minutes. So basically, if they don't recycle in the next 10 minutes, I suspect they will probably stand down for the day.
Alright, so we are still in a hold here at T-minus 31 seconds, expecting a recycle and a new T0, hopefully before too long. The window does last all the way till 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 1800 UTC, and we're keeping an eye on the weather with regards to that as well, but still holding for an update, hoping for another recycle still. Excuse me. But in the meantime, we do have some more questions coming in. So first off, Amanda, how much thrust does Rocket 3 have, and what's the thrust-weight ratio with that?
Yes, so the overall thrust of the first stage vehicle is 32,500 pounds. So there are 5 first stage engines on our engine bay, and each one of those deliver about 6,500 pounds of thrust individually, and there's 740 pounds on the upper stage.
Gotcha. And that thrust, again, we talked about earlier about the fuel combination of RPX kerosene and liquid oxygen. Martin is asking, is the rocket propellant, the kerosene component, not cooled? Because you can see only the liquid oxygen tank is frosty there.
Yep, no, the kerosene is not cooled. That is at atmospheric conditions.
Gotcha. Another question here. What is the payload capacity of Rocket 3?
Yeah, so Rocket 3 is able to deliver anywhere from 25 to 150 kilograms of payload up to a 500 kilometer sun synchronous orbit.
Gotcha.
So yeah, they're just going over the capacities of the rocket there.
For today's launch, still in a hold. We're going to provide another update as soon as we have it, but the teams are hoping to recycle. So keep those questions coming in the meantime. Go ahead and tag us at NASA Spaceflight in chat. We're going to keep looking for some more questions while we wait for another update as well, and we'll come back as soon as we have it.
Yeah, we do have some bad weather, in quotations, bad rocket weather coming in. It's about 10 minutes away, according to their last update on it, so it could be what shuts down the launch, unfortunately, if they don't decide to recycle relatively quickly here. We're not really sure what the issue was that caused them to go into this hold yet. They haven't provided any detail, but they do, like the window lasts for 2 hours, so we're already about 47 minutes through that window. But the real limiting factor will be basically the weather. If the weather does deteriorate too much, they'll basically just decide to recycle. But they are still filling the vehicle. You can see that because we still do see those condensation clouds coming off the rocket, which means they're still venting. And you do see that there is still ice on the upper part of the first stage, so they do seem to still be ready, if they want to be, to do a launch. But yeah, that could all just be for show, who knows. We'll see. Usually when they recycle, they have to recycle back to at least 10 minutes because, you know, they like to go through the go-no-go poll again. But yeah, we'll see. So yeah, why are they sending satellites to space? Basically, they're sending them to space because NASA has contracted them to do that. So they have 2 satellites on board there. They're the Tropics satellites, and they're dedicated to doing some investigations for figuring out predictions for hurricanes and stuff. And basically, there's going to be a total of 6 satellites, and so just the first 2 of them are going to be on this rocket. And the whole constellation is going to be able to provide better data on predicting and figuring out why hurricanes intensify. So it will be very useful information for NASA. That's basically the purpose of the launch today. But yeah, a little bit weird that there's bad weather in Florida, yes. Like I said, it's bad weather for rockets. Maybe not necessarily bad weather, you know, for us mere mortals. I know I would be happy to be in Florida right now. Usually it's a lot better than the weather here in Germany. I don't think NASA's going after any UFOs anytime soon, but unless they're hiding out in the hurricanes, I don't know. Maybe UFOs like to hide in the hurricanes. Then Tropics will find them. The reason why Tropics is such an important satellite constellation for weather monitoring and specifically hurricane monitoring is because of its rapid flyover times. So it won't just fly over the system once and then not be coming back for many hours, because once they have all 6 of these satellites deployed, they'll be able to have flyover rates of like once every 30 minutes, once every 45 minutes, which is a vast improvement on the current state of weather observation for weather satellites. So this will be able to give them basically better predictions and also just better data and knowledge about why these storms are moving the way they do and also intensifying the way they do, which is really important if we want to understand their behavior and maybe one day have tools available to be able to either stop them, slow them down, move them in different directions. Like, this is kind of the ultimate end goal for this type of research, I would say. Someone's saying that apparently Florida's weather sucks. Oh, come on. It's beautiful and hot. Although, yeah, I guess it does attract a lot of the alligators and snakes and stuff. And of course, I would love to be able to launch watch the rockets launch from my home. I mean, that would be amazing, just to see it in your backyard. I think that's a huge plus to living in Florida. Maybe one day I'll have to move just for that reason. When will the rocket launch? So the rocket is planned to launch sometime in the next... the window lasts for another hour and 10 minutes, so it's supposed to launch between I think it's 4 o'clock UTC and 6 o'clock UTC. So basically, it can launch any time in that window, legally. But the problem right now is that the weather is coming in, we suspect, so we've been told. And that is probably going to be in a no-go situation in about 5 minutes. So if they don't recycle the launch by then they will probably stand down for the day. Which looks to be the way this is going. But we'll see. Maybe the weather is not as bad as they think it is. And yeah, they just turned off the clock, so that's more likely. Like, they'll probably choose to stand down instead of pushing forward. But who knows? Maybe they still want to reset. I still don't see them detanking, so once they detank, then we know. Someone's saying that it's beautiful right now for a launch. I agree. It looks pretty good to me. I wouldn't complain about this weather for sure. Apparently it's still beach weather. Okay, maybe we're gonna get an update here. This is the mission control they have. It's just the 4 of them. That's all there is in the mission control. Part of the lean operations that ASTRA uses these days. This makes them actually the probably the smallest launch operation. I think they'd even be smaller than like most amateur rocketry setups with just 4 people. Like, usually amateur rocketry setups use like 10 people or so. So it's really crazy they can get away with this. Come on, Astra, give us some information. What's going on? I suspect their switch away from the rocket itself, though, is looking like they're probably going to scrub. But we'll see. It really depends on the weather. If the weather is okay, then they still have time to reset, because they still have basically an hour in their window. Just to reiterate, the purpose of the mission right now is to send 2 satellites called Tropics, and it's going to send them into an orbit which is 30 degrees inclination.
Alright, so we are still waiting for an update on today's countdown. Again, we'll provide that update as soon as we have it. In the meantime, let's go ahead and take a look at this overview video about the NASA Tropics mission in partnership with ASTRA.
So here's an overview of what the mission's all about.
A research poll showed that of 9 different categories that NASA should focus on, number 1 on the list is to observe the Earth's climate. The Tropics mission is a mission that Americans really care about because it is directly observing our climate.
Tropics has a very specific need for their orbital configuration. We need to go to a 30-degree inclined orbit, and no one else really wants to go there. The ride shares are all going to sun-synchronous orbits or mid-inclinations, so it's very well targeted to a smaller vehicle with a very targeted insertion where they can get us exactly where we want to go, and ASTRA is perfect for that.
And so being able to launch 3 different times for $8 million is unprecedented. Because of our unique ability to get to 3 different orbital planes in a very short period of time at a low cost.
Why I'm excited about Tropics is coming out of NASA, having the opportunity to fly satellites for the organization I used to work for is personally gratifying for me. It's also a really important mission because we can detect tropical storms, we can help people evacuate, we can save lives, and it's a mission that's really well designed for ASTRA's capability, being able to put multiple rockets up into multiple planes rapidly.
And we have the honor of being the final and most important piece at this moment in time of their mission, which is get that hardware in space, exactly where it needs to go. We see that there are increasingly smaller satellites that are smarter, that are doing cool things in orbit, but they need to go to particular destinations at particular times.
The real end game here is improving our ability to forecast tropical cyclones. What we're trying to do is make measurements in the microwave wavelength region, and those have the advantage of being able to penetrate the cloud tops and see the storm thermodynamics underneath the clouds. We're going to get something we've never had before in the history of weather satellites, which is revisit rates of better than 1 hour.
For the team itself, this will be a massive culmination of the last 3 years of work of developing this launch system to be able to do these things that we set out to do from the very beginning.
From ASTRA's perspective, it's really important because we believe in space at scale, and to do that, you need to have much more frequent launches and access to space. And so this has been an opportunity for us to really understand how can we further compress the turnaround time between launches, both in terms of building the rockets and in conducting the launches.
What this milestone means for us is delivering a really important mission for our customer, but also demonstrating a capability that others can leverage in the future.
And so the opportunity to be a part of something like Tropics, where you get to make a difference and make a really large impact in the lives of people and help humanity as a whole, does mean a lot to me, and it really excites me as well going into this mission, knowing that we can help do something to make the world a better, safer place for people.
I have to say it would be pretty ironic.
All right, everyone. Again, we're still waiting for an update on today's countdown. The window does last again till 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, or 1800 UTC. So we'll provide an update as soon as we have it. There is still time left in the window, and the teams are continuing to work to resolve this hold. So stand by for an update as soon as we have it.
It would be pretty ironic if the weather satellites get delayed because of weather. But yeah, you guys are right. The weather at the Cape is obviously more of an issue in the summer months, and of course that's mainly because of hurricanes, which Tropics is actually going to be studying in the first place. So it should be most directly useful to people that live in these types of areas, like in Florida or the Caribbean and stuff. This is definitely a mission that is going to help with forecasting these weather storms for sure. So maybe in 5 years they'll have better software to be able to predict the paths of hurricanes specifically because of this this constellation. So definitely a really, really cool mission. Although we would like some updates from ASTRA on what's going on. I think maybe the weather is not as bad as they think, because they seem to still be wanting to go based on the activity in the operations in the mission management area here. This is, just to reiterate, this is the control room that we're seeing right now. These 4 people with their setups. As you can see, it's a pretty lean operation that they have, and I think it's also in the factory, but I'm not sure exactly where this is set up. They might be working remotely, I'm not sure. So once the satellite goes to orbit, how fast does it orbit the Earth? So because it's just going up to about a 600 kilometer orbit, the time that it takes to get around the entire Earth is about 95 minutes or so. So they're planning to put 2 satellites into each plane, which allows them basically to have a refly time every 45 minutes, if you think about it. So 95 minutes divided by 2. So this is really the advantage of this whole constellation, is they are spaced out in such a way that they'll be able to have that refly in a single plane of every 45 minutes. But they can also see enough of the Earth that basically one plane will be flying over as the Earth rotates underneath it. And as soon as one satellite plane is no longer able to see that particular spot, the next satellite plane is able to see it. So essentially they have continuous coverage at this 45-minute interval, and that's what allows them to have a really good coverage of the Earth. Wow, a 50% chance of thunderstorms every afternoon in Florida in the summertime. That would be like my dream place, because I love thunderstorms. Of course, not for rocketry reasons. I would prefer them not to come for that. But yeah, summer storms are always great. To have like a nice hot morning, and then you get the thunderstorm coming in the afternoon. It's like a relief from the heat of the day. I don't know why you guys are complaining about the Florida weather. I mean, I would love it. Way better than snow, I'll tell you that right now. That's what you get up here in northern Germany, and I'm from Canada, so lots of that there. Do I think it will lift off today? I would say the probability is less than 50% at this point. They said there was a weather issue. They seem to be in a kind of a long hold here, so it's kind of pointing towards they're probably going to stand down. But they still haven't said that officially, so you never know. And the last time we saw the rocket, which was about 10 minutes ago, they were still fully fueling it and everything, so they were ready to go from that perspective. However, they haven't switched back to that camera, so maybe they are detanking right now and we just don't know it. Could be the case. Some people are saying it's every afternoon that thunderstorms come in the summer. Well, like I said, I wouldn't mind that so much. I would prefer thunderstorms to snow any day of the week. Yeah. It's not that the weather is surprising necessarily, it's just that when you're trying to launch a rocket, it can be annoying, you know. Mother Nature always getting in the way. What I would be interested to see is a commercial rocket that is completely weather insensitive. So it can just launch no matter what the case is, you know? The rain or shine, lightning, whatever, they just design it so it can fly through everything. That's kind of like how airplanes are, right? Like, why do rockets have to be so sensitive? You know, they fly airplanes all the time through storms and rain and, you know, snow, and they of course have some limitations, but definitely way more robust than rockets are. And they can definitely take lightning strikes a lot easier. Like, they designed the planes to be able to handle that. Seems like it would be pretty easy to design a rocket to handle that too, but I think the stakes are just a little bit higher, and that's the issue. Will the vehicle become space junk? Yes, it will become. It's not going to become space junk. It's going to become ocean junk. So yeah, the first stage of the vehicle will come back to Earth relatively quickly. It's going to crash somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, just east of Florida. And the second stage of the vehicle is not going to become space junk, like maybe some rockets that are still in operation today might. Instead, it's actually going to deorbit itself and probably land somewhere in the Indian Ocean. That's usually where they send spent payloads. So nothing actually becomes space junk. The goal of operations in today's world is to try to stop space junk from happening, because it can be really dangerous and threaten future launches. So we try to have everything fall into the ocean. So for the entire constellation of Tropics, they're planning to have a constellation of 6 satellites, and it's just 2 satellites that are on this mission. And the reason for that is so that they can get an entire global coverage.
All right, everyone. Thank you for your patience and sticking with us. We'll keep providing, and we'll provide another update again as soon as we have it. Right now, the teams are just still working to resolve this hold in the window that, again, lasts for another hour. So plenty of time in the window, but standing by for another update, and we'll provide that and a new T0 as soon as we have it. In the meantime, we do have a couple more questions that we can go through here. So let's see. If today is scrubbed, when is the next likely launch window, Amanda?
Yeah, we do have one more day in our launch window, which is tomorrow, Monday, June 13th.
Right, and we're not pushed to that just yet, but there is a backup opportunity tomorrow. For tomorrow, does the weather look favorable for tomorrow's attempt?
Right now, it does look like the weather is actually more favorable than it is today.
Got it. The weather's still kind of holding out for today, so we're going to keep an eye on that. But another attempt with a favorable weather forecast tomorrow. So again, provide that update as soon as we have it. Other questions here. We do have a question earlier. We were talking about how the teams were working on LOX conditioning. Can you actually elaborate on what that means and what's what they might have been working on with regards to LOX conditioning? Right,
so that's part of our propellant loading procedure. It's filling up the liquid oxygen into the liquid oxygen tank. As the vehicle is sitting on the pad, obviously, since it is a cryogenic fluid, that fluid is boiling off. And so as it sits there, we do need to top off the tank. So we need to continuously refill the liquid oxygen as the vehicle is sitting on the pad prior to launch.
Got it.
So you can see there that they're still continuously loading the rocket. So they're still ready to launch if they want to be. So this is a good sign. That means that they're probably still trying to launch today. And the weather seems to still be holding. So again, the window goes until for another 50 minutes, and usually a recycle takes about 15 minutes. So we still have time to go through this process. A quick question, what happens if the rocket explodes? Will they make another one? Well, the rocket actually has exploded a couple times in the past, and yes, they will just make another one. It is a little bit unfortunate if it explodes, though, because it actually takes out a lot of the payload that's on the vehicle. Of course, this time it's those 2 Tropics satellites. Of course, it's a constellation of 6 of them, so I think that they probably could make 2 more, not too big of a deal. So in the case that it did explode in this case, it's probably not really that big of a deal. But of course we don't want to have that happen, because come on, it's gonna be fine, don't worry. But just to keep in mind here, like, ASTRA's philosophy is that they can just make new ones really, really fast. So they're kind of having already the philosophy that the way they deal with this is just, of course, make a new one. And also usually they tend to insure the payload, although I'm not sure if ASTRA has insurance yet because they don't have a very good launch reputation just yet. But we'll see what happens with that as it progresses. What other factors determine the launch window? Well, okay, so there's a lot of things that you have to do in order to enforce a launch window. The main ones being that you have to actually clear the area for launch. So in this case, the area is basically the ocean moving out towards Florida, from Florida into the Atlantic Ocean to the east. So they have to clear that entire marine traffic zone of boats and stuff and say, you're not allowed to come into the zone because there's a rocket launching, and they don't want there to be a risk that, a boat could be hit by a rocket. So yeah, you have to do that. You also have to clear the airspace, so there can be no planes flying in the area that the rocket's going to be launching towards. You also have to have all the people in the control room, monitoring the launch. You have to clear the area of the actual physical ground area around the rocket. You have to also be continuously topping up off all the fluids and the propellant and stuff, which, if you do this for a long time, it gets expensive. So those are all the things that kind of go into a launch window that's not just, the orbit that you have to go into. There's also the fact that they usually try to pick windows where there is less traffic in orbit in general. So that sometimes gets factored into the launch windows as well. Although that's usually more for launch windows that are going into sun synchronous or orbits that are, meeting other things in orbit. So that usually wouldn't be the case for this type of an orbital launch. So yeah, that usually windows open up for 2 or 3 hours, and it's mainly to kind of enforce those things that I just talked about.
Long in a shipping container. So roughly around 5 shipping containers is what we need to set up a new space.
5 shipping containers for an orbital launch system. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Another question that was there
Again,
is,
everyone, if you just stick with us, we are waiting for another update on today's countdown. Still in a hold right now. The window lasts until 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, and we will provide another update. Again, as soon as we have it, the team's still working on resolving that hold. But keep the questions coming. Tag us at NASA Spaceflight in chat, and we'll come back with some more updates and some more questions and answers once we have them.
Yeah, so meeting things in space is definitely something that drives the launch window, but in this case, they're not actually meeting anything in space, so it's actually more the other factors that are driving it. If you want to meet something in space, usually that means that your launch window is instantaneous. So, like, you have one shot, boom. If you don't meet it, then you have to delay for another day. But because they don't have to get into a specific orbital plane in this case, because it's the first of the batch of 6 satellites that's going up, they can pretty much have a more flexible launch window. So that's why you have the 2 hours instead. Another question that came up in the chat here was that, is it true that they will turn off the ISS and drown it in the bottom of the ocean? Inevitably, that is where everything in space ends up going. So yes, one day they will retire the space shuttle, or not the space shuttle, sorry, they've already done that. They will retire the International Space Station, and it will be essentially deorbited in a controlled manner probably, and they will probably try to crash it somewhere again in the Indian Ocean. That's like the graveyard for all space stuff. I'm not really sure how they're planning to deorbit the ISS, because it will be quite a fiery event. Let's just say that. Because of how big it is, it's not going to burn up in the atmosphere. Like, lots of it's going to make it all the way to the ocean. So they have to be really careful about how they do it. And little changes in the geometry and stuff of the station can kind of send a lot of different pieces in different directions. So they'll have to definitely be thinking about that in a controlled manner. I suspect they'll have a specific mission that's designed to literally deorbit the ISS really quickly, so they can have a really good identification of where they expect it to end up. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. That's probably going to happen sometime in the 2030s, I suspect, because it's still a useful station, but it'll be getting old by then. Is it legal for amateurs to launch their own rockets? Absolutely. It depends a little bit on the country that you live in. So if you are American, then yes, you can launch your own rocket as long as it is class F or lower. So that's telling you how much energy is in the motor. So if you look and try to buy a motor online, anything up to an F-class motor is completely free, and you can, well, you have to pay for it, of course, but from a legal perspective, you can go and launch it, no problem, no issues, as long as it's like an open area and you're not like, you know, launching it through someone's car or something, you should be fine. If you go higher than that, you need to have amateur certifications. So they have like level 1, level 2, and level 3 amateur certifications. And you can go and check out your local rocketry hobbyists. I'm sure there's probably one near you. There's lots of them all over America. So you can go see about what it takes to get those certifications, and then you can launch slightly more advanced rockets. And at class 3, you can pretty much launch anything all the way up to basically a professional rocket. So there's not really a restriction, more of a learning curve you need to go through in order to be allowed to launch. If you live in other countries, though, there could be other restrictions. So, for instance, in Germany, it's not usually possible for an amateur to launch a rocket much above 1 kilometer. So, if you do that, they will know and not be happy. Could get some pretty steep fines. As ASTRA, we're also an amateur rocketry group here in Germany, so we have to actually get specific clearance to be able to launch the rockets that we want to. So we're going to probably be trying to partner with the Bundeswehr, which is the German military, to be able to launch our rocket, our first one anyway, the demonstrator, on military property where, you know, we don't have any chances of hitting someone's house. And then for the big one that's going to go all the way to space, we need to go to actually a professional launch site, just like the one in Cape Canaveral, except it'll be in the UK, in order to launch our rocket there. We won't be able to do that in mainland Europe. It's definitely a struggle. Sometimes it's like, you know, living in Europe is tough because it's such a dense area, so it's hard to be able to do these types of things. But yeah, there's always a way. Usually you want to find a launch site that's near the ocean, because that's where you're able to do the more of the high power stuff. Or the desert. That's why America is great, because they have you can just go to the desert and you can do a lot of stuff there. Yeah. We're still waiting on this launch of the ASTRA vehicle, though. Rocket 3. They're still fueling it, so we still see those clouds coming off the rocket, and we still see the ice on the top half of the first stage. So that means that she is still ready to go. We're just waiting on their recycle, and actually, it looks like it brightened up a little bit. So I think the weather actually got better. Yeah. Good to hear you had a rocketry club at your high school, Steve. That's relatively rare, I would say, to have a rocketry club at high school. I would have loved that. We didn't have anything like that at my high school in Canada. Yeah, there's also lots of high school groups in America doing some pretty amazing things. Like some of them are launching rockets like up to 10 kilometers and stuff. So, which is like even high for a collegiate group. So you can do some pretty crazy stuff in high school. Thanks a lot, Lost Helmet. I'm glad I'm spicing up the weight a little bit. Keep the questions coming. I'm loving them. So just to reiterate, the launch window does go for another 40 minutes. So they can recycle anytime in that window. And it looks like they're probably trying to do that because they still are fueling this thing. So yeah, a quick question in German here. Unfortunately, I don't speak German super well, so if I got the meaning of your question wrong, I apologize. When are we planning to do the first rocket launch? Well, we are planning to do our demonstrator launch sometime by the end of the year. The goal is to do that somewhere in Germany because we don't want to have to travel to another country just to do a small rocket launch. It's just going to go up to like 3 kilometers, so it would be kind of silly for us to go all the way to the UK or something to be able to launch that. So we're planning right now. We're doing a bunch of testing, and we've tested a little bit with our recovery system. We did a video on that. You can go check it out. It's really cool. And we're also building our structure now. So we've started winding our carbon fiber tank that we're going to be building to contain the nitrous oxide. And we've also started building the frame that we're going to use to actually build our paraffin wax grain, because it's going to be a hybrid rocket using paraffin wax and nitrous oxide. So that should be the beginnings of putting together a propulsion test stand, and hopefully we can start testing the propulsion system in the summer. And if we're able to do that, then yeah, we should be ready to maybe have a rocket ready to go sometime this winter. But we'll see. That's just what we think of right now, and there could be things that come up that obviously delay the launch and stuff. Yeah, so that's the plan for when we launch our first rockets. We're hoping to launch the Kármán line rockets sometime by the end of next year, so 2023, maybe early 2024. Yeah, if they scratch this rocket launch, now going back to the professional ASTRA Rocket 3, if they do scratch this launch, they do have a window that's opening up tomorrow, probably sometime around the same time. But we don't know that's going to happen just yet because they are still fueling the vehicle, so they are technically ready. It's just a matter of what exactly the problem was with their systems that caused them to go into the hole in the first place. If they're able to resolve that in time, they have about 38 more minutes. So thunderstorms over Titusville. I actually don't know where Titusville is. Is that close to Cape Canaveral? If it is close to Cape Canaveral, then I guess we should be worried. But otherwise, yeah. I'm glad to see that young people are still really excited about space. This is definitely a good thing. Of course, if I had a rocket launch in my backyard, I'm sure a lot more people would be excited about it if they were that close. So it's really cool that you get to see it from that vantage point. I've actually never seen a professional rocket launch live, and that's one of the things I'd like to do at some point. Of course, I grew up in Canada, so that limited my launch opportunities, of course. There's no professional rockets that go to space in Canada just yet, so. So Titusville is just south of Cape Canaveral. Okay. Well, hopefully those thunderclouds are not going northward then. Hopefully the wind is still blowing south, keeping them away. Yeah, mission control is always a stressful job though, you know? If something goes wrong, it's all your fault. I guess it's cool to be in the action though, of course, right? Doing the no-go poll, being the person that says go or no go. Yeah, from Canada. Yeah, there's not that many professional teams, professional amateur teams. in Canada, but there are actually more nowadays because there's a good community growing up in the Ontario, Quebec area. There's some good teams that are coming up, and also even from my hometown of Calgary, hometown, they're also starting to do some interesting amateur rocketry there as well. So I would say Canada is probably going to be a place that you're going to see a little more activity in the coming years. One thing to say that's noteworthy is actually the team with the most powerful rocket ever fired is actually Canadian. They're called Space Concordia, and they're coming out of the Montreal area from Concordia University, and they've actually developed the most powerful liquid rocket and also the most powerful rocket developed by amateurs in the entire world. I think they were able to hit a total of 37 kilonewtons with their rocket. And yeah, they're planning to use this to go to the Kármán line this year. So I would definitely give them a look because they're doing some really exciting stuff in Canada. But yeah, I never lived in the East, so I didn't really get much exposure to the teams that were out there. And the development of amateur rocketry in Canada has certainly been more of a recent phenomenon, I would say. Yeah, this is actually a good question. How to make sure that the pieces return to the ocean and are not hitting ships and stuff. Well, when they do the deorbit burns that bring the payloads back down to Earth and stuff, they usually, like, first of all, they target a place in the ocean where usually there's not much traffic in the first place. And that's why I keep mentioning the Indian Ocean as the place that usually send these things. So it's not just the Indian Ocean, it's a spot kind of in the southern Indian Ocean where there's literally like no islands or anything, and ships usually are not anywhere near that spot. And the reason why they do that is because when you're actually doing a deorbit, because of the density changes in the atmosphere, you can't actually get an exact accurate position of where you expect to land.
We are going to finish our configuration loads and checks and then do a terminal count pre-pull, and we'll be checking back in with the range to see if they are go or no-go. It does appear like the weather is favorable until at least 10:45 a.m. Pacific.
Yeah, so that Florida weather doing the Florida weather thing where it might just hold out long enough, so we'll keep an eye out on that. But sounds like we are getting close to a new T0, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, we do have a couple more questions to go through, so we'll keep those coming with that update.
A new T0, guys, potentially, could be coming. So stay tuned. Yeah, so don't leave just yet. It could still we could still be coming back to a launch. Yeah, just to finish off the question about how do we keep the pieces from hitting ships. So the first way they do it is by targeting a place where there's usually nothing. The second part of it is that they try to do the deorbit burns in a way that the thing deorbits in one orbit after coming in. They want to kind of limit the amount of time that it spends doing going through the aerobraking in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere basically slowing the satellite down or the piece down. And the reason for that is that the more it does that, the more uncertain the target landing zone gets. So typically, if they have enough fuel, they try to deorbit quickly, and that way they can kind of target the location they want to end up at.
We were talking about the new mission control setup. That's still here in Alameda, right?
Yes. Yeah. So even though this pod is portable, the intention is for mission control to stay here in Alameda rather than actually transporting these pods to the launch site. Mission control is intended to be at headquarters. However, we do have our smaller team that does head out to the launch site. That is our red team. So the intention is to make sure we have two small teams supporting each of the launches. One that does travel to the launch site, but then also the mission control pod staying here and supporting on site at headquarters.
So this mission control is actually at the ASTRA site. So pretty crazy. That they like basically are controlling this rocket like completely remotely. It's like the ultimate COVID rocket experience. Controlling the rocket from halfway across the country. So, yeah, rocket launches at night are always quite exciting. The main reason for that being that, of course, you really get to see all the parts of the rocket launch because it's so bright, the rocket flame and everything. And yeah, I can only imagine how amazing it would be to see at night.
That an AB1 managed power systems.
They've just
toggle
started the
ground
clock.
Power systems
Here we go.
authority is still true.
We're at 12
Taking on
minutes.
Countdown, AB1 managed power systems authority. Ground power systems authority is true.
So they're going to go through the
AB1
no-go
managed
pole now,
polling,
basically.
both
Making
ground
sure
and
everything's
guidance
okay.
polling is set to true.
Setting both ground and guidance polling to true.
GNC.
Alright, so as you can see now, the countdown clock has resumed to just about T-minus 12 minutes and counting. We're going to come up on another go, no-go poll like we heard earlier. The teams are back into a recycle and aiming for a new T0 of 10:43 a.m. Pacific time. That's 1:43 p.m. Eastern time, local time in Cape Canaveral, or a 17:43 UTC. Again, now just under T-minus 12 minutes, and the teams are tracking towards a new T0 for today's launch.
So the new T0 is
really quickly, we
going
can do
to
a brief
be-
overview of the mission timeline again if you are just joining us. This is what we would expect to see after the last 10 minutes of this count.
The new T0 is 17:43 UTC. So depending on where you are, that's going to be in 12 minutes. So looking forward to having this finally launch. Hopefully it'll be worth the wait. Hopefully they've properly fixed their problems and we get through the go no-go poll as well. Yeah, you're Cosmic Black. You're right. The mission control is a lot younger than it used to be. All the people in that mission control room are probably under the age of 40 for sure. That's another part that's cool about the ASTRA team is that they're all like pretty young engineers. So yeah, it's not a bunch of old people trying to do stuff. Usually NASA gets that way just because it's such an established organization that's been around for so long. So of course there's going to be people that are working there for a long time. But yeah, with groups like ASTRA, it's all usually young people who have crazy ideas that are trying to, change the way we do space or whatever. Yeah, I know. Living today is quite a lot more exciting, I would say, as an aerospace engineer anyway, because there's just so many tools that you can play with. Like right now, we're 3D printing a lot of our rocket parts. So I can only imagine what that would be like, 30 years ago when that wasn't available. I imagine it would take you have to think a lot more about like how to manufacture stuff if 3D printing is not available. But even then, we can't 3D print our rocket bodies and stuff, so we still have to do the old school manufacturing sometimes. And the Rocket 3 here is definitely one of those more old school rockets because it's mostly made out of like sheet metal and stuff that they just weld together. So a little more old school than these rockets that are like 3D printed and stuff. Yeah. It's turning out to be a bit of a long launch, but hopefully it will be well worth the wait. Looks like we're a go. They just went through the go, no go poll, and it seems like everything is
All right,
a
as you
go.
just heard, the teams have once again pulled go for launch. T-minus 8 minutes and counting. You can see right now that's the mission control team. Amanda, you want to give us an overview of the personnel that are supporting today's launch?
Yeah, so in the mission control pod, you see they're sitting here at our headquarters in Alameda. So in the bottom left-hand side of the screen there, you see Joshua Green. He is our controller, also the call sign Tango. His responsibilities are executing commands that are being called out for the ground support equipment, as well as the rocket and automation, and also just make sure that all the clicks and actuation are running properly. On the bottom right-hand side of the screen there is Jarrett Bullion. He is our command and data handling, our call sign CDH. And his responsibilities are just debugging some of the automation, monitoring progress, and looking for any anomalies in the launch system. In the back right there is our assistant flight director for...
Yeah, so this is probably going to be the final attempt. So hopefully this is the one that goes.
procedures and is ultimately our final launch authority. In addition to the launch operations team, we do also have an engineering backroom that helps to monitor the rocket, update software, and perform other various tasks during operations. These are generally the engineers that are responsible for the system elements, and they are there to ensure that things are working properly.
And you should be excited all the time. But yes, usually once they get past the terminal count, then it's more likely to be a go. But just because it's within the 1 minute doesn't mean it's for sure going to launch, because again, the last hold was stopped at T-minus 31 seconds. So
site for today's mission.
Yeah, so we also have our red team. The red team are the folks on the ground in Cape Canaveral. These are the field engineers that travel with the rocket, and they provide on-site support during the delivery, the setup, and all of the final pre-launch preparations for the vehicle. They're basically responsible for all of the physical work that needs to be done on the vehicle after production has officially handed off the vehicle and launch system to launch operations. So basically find and debug all the mechanical problems. So Adam Fish is our red lead. He is the pad leader that has the final say on things, the pad itself, and leads the activities at the launch site. Then we have our red 2 through 4 members. It's Eric Larson, Corey Beals, and Benjamin Barrow, and they're responsible for just doing a lot of the assembling and troubleshooting of the mechanical and electrical tasks at the launch site. Then we have Melissa Cornelius, who is our ASTRA safety officer. Their responsibility is ensuring a safe launch, so that requires a lot of coordination between the range, FAA, and internal ASTRA personnel. And then we have Eric Steinberg, aka Steiny, as our red IT. He is our on-site IT and network professional that basically...
I have no idea why they were complaining about the weather. It looks totally gorgeous. I don't see any thunderstorms at all. So
the next launch attempt for Tropics Flight 1
hopefully,
on ASTRA
hopefully it's not going
LV0010. Let's listen in.
Spin sideways out of control. Hopefully that was a one-time incident. So if you remember back a couple of months ago, they did have a strange failure where their upper stage was basically exploded out of the rocket fairing because the rocket fairing didn't open properly. And that caused them to kind of spin out of control, and then they couldn't really recover and get the payload to orbit. But they have fixed that issue, so that shouldn't reoccur, let's just say. We can't say it's officially launching today until T0, so anything could happen between now and then. But for weather reasons, they are going to have a go. As you can see, they have a clear blue sky, so no weather excuses.
T-minus 4 minutes and count.
They must have some nice jet streams keeping those thunderclouds away from the launch site, so that's always good to see.
Rock, flight on countdown.
Rock.
At this time, can you verify range has restarted telemetry recordings?
Telemetry recorders are running.
You can see some of the teams here in Alameda gathering to watch today's
Commander,
launch.
control room, if you require RF data in flight, be prepared to switch over your pages.
So yeah, just I think the rate
MECO
that is
flight on countdown. Please be prepared to issue option when rocket IIP marker passes min MECO marker and is within dispersed trajectories, calling out at event.
MECO copies.
usually 30 seconds left is a good sign it's a go, but it
Reminder
wasn't
all
about
that any
2 hours
three-word
earlier.
hold call
So.
from here on out will be on abort. ACE, please start PSD recordings and downrange ground station recordings.
Done.
All right, we're getting close here.
Two minutes.
T-minus 2 minutes, all systems go so far.
I think they have the best visibility they've had all for the whole launch window right now. So maybe it was worth the hold to get some really good camera footage. I hope they get a really long track all the way to all the way to the MECO point.
Seconds.
All right, the rocket's usually on its own systems now. I agree, perfect weather indeed. Don't know why there was a whole deal about it
60
before.
seconds. Vehicle is on internal control.
Less than a minute to go. Everything looks on track.
First stage LOX tank coming to liftoff pressure. First stage fuel tank coming to liftoff pressure.
All right, we're officially past the last time.
30 seconds.
I think it's gonna go, guys.
20.
Okay, glad I waited.
15. 10. Water on. 8. 7. 6. 5. 4.
That's a launch. It was worth it.
Chamber pressure is nominal.
Our next objective is max Q, which is the period of maximum dynamic pressure on the first stage structure during flight, which is coming up just after 1 minute.
All right, this is looking good, guys. This is looking fantastic.
There's a tracking shot of the rocket ascending from Cape Canaveral on its way to space.
Maybe they were secretly just holding for the
as well as live telemetry
good
on the
camera
bottom right
views.
of your screen.
This is really a good tracking shot. So the next part that's coming up here is going to be maximum dynamic pressure.
Into flight. Vehicle's now past to the point of expected maximum aerodynamic pressure. Now getting some
Oh, this is a
airborne
beautiful
views of the
picture
rocket
right
as
here.
Cape Canaveral below.
They seem to be jostling around a little bit more than usual, though, on that view.
Our next milestone is going to be the main engine cutoff, which will be called out by launch ops as MECO. Once that option
Yeah,
is
this is
confirmed,
fantastic
the
camera
mission
work.
will be set to shut down the 5 first stage engines and allow the vehicle to briefly coast. We will then signal to pop open the fairings and allow those to fall away from the vehicle. The first stage will then release upper stage for the final segment of our flight.
So MECO is going to happen at about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. And that's when those first stage engines are going to basically shut down. And then the whole sequence with the payload fairings deploying and the second stage coming out and firing its engine can occur. And I hope they have the payload cameras on and showing it to us this time, because last time they were a little bit hesitant to show that view.
2.5 minutes in the flight, again coming up on main engine cutoff at just about T+3 minutes. Everything looking good so far.
So it should be in just a few seconds here. That was MECO.
Confirmed, option received.
And now we should see the deployment of the fairings here.
Onboard view looking up. There you
Perfect.
see payload fairing separation. This is a camera on the upper stage. And there is stage separation and ether ignition, upper stage ignition.
Oh, I think it's ignited. No flame, no flame. I think it's just, oh, here we go. It's a slow upload. I think the engine has ignited.
For just about 5 minutes on its way to low Earth orbit. Again, everything looking good so far.
No, they're not going to recover the fairings. Everything about this rocket is not reusable, so everything will fall into the ocean.
You can actually see from the onboard telemetry the vehicle is actually already in space. However, it has to get that horizontal velocity needed to stay in space via achieving low Earth orbit. And so we're going to be watching that velocity marker tick up on the bottom right of your screen. But 4 minutes in the flight, everything is looking good so far.
We do have a bit of a slow uplink speed here for the camera, but everything seems to be going correctly so far. It's not spinning out of control or anything. So we're just waiting to get up to the speed that we need to be to stay in orbit, which is going to be about 7,800 meters per second. So be watching that velocity indicator there on the bottom right of the screen, which is showing that. And of course, the altitude that we're targeting is 600 kilometers today. So we're already about half of the way there for both speed and altitude. Yeah, unfortunately, they don't pick it up out of the ocean, anything of the rocket. It's all just going to sink to the bottom. Nothing on the ASTRA rocket is designed to be recovered. It's all designed to be basically as cheap as possible, and then they just launch them as expendable rockets.
The path that the rocket has traced so far on its trajectory, pretty much due east, right down the center of that corridor.
And of course,
it's in the flight, everything looking good. And we're going to expect this burn to continue until about 8.5 minutes after liftoff.
The reason why they don't try to recover anything just yet
the 8.5 minute mark,
is because they're basically at the scale that the ASTRA rocket is built at, which is just to launch about 150 kilograms of payload into low Earth orbit. It just doesn't make sense, and there aren't really enough margins left to be able to actually recover the vehicle. But maybe in the future, when they start to get more into rocket building and rocket designing, they might try to make their operations a little more efficient by doing reusability. But so far, that hasn't been mentioned in any of their mission statements or anything. So I wouldn't hold your breath for that. The cost of the booster would look good in your yard. I don't know. The booster is probably costing somewhere in the order of $1 or $2 million. So if you can go and catch it, all the power to you. You could go and get that stuff. I mean, if you wanted to go and find the booster in the ocean, I mean, you're totally free to do so. You will, however, need to get some pretty serious dive equipment because it's all going to be a couple kilometers underneath the ocean. So I think Jeff Bezos actually recovered one of the rocket engines from the Apollo era. So, I mean, if you have the money to go do those kinds of operations, I mean, theoretically, you can go take whatever you want out of the ocean. So
You keep an eye on that altitude.
If you can find a way to do that economically,
510
why not?
kilometers in altitude. Again, the target orbit for today is at 550 kilometers in altitude.
Yeah, the environmental concerns
that
of
velocity
a rocket in the ocean is not as significant as you might think it is. Like, it's just ultimately, in the end, when it's all expended, it's just a bunch of metal that is falling into the ocean. And you would be shocked at how much metal is just thrown into the ocean in general. So, oh boy, this doesn't look good. So we appear to be in a uncontrolled spin here. What the heck is going on? We're almost to the point we want to be. Maybe it might be that they just turned off the engine and now they're in a bit of a spin. They're just trying to get to a target altitude of 600 kilometers, and then they're probably going to circularize. So I suspect they may have just turned off the engine, and they have basically control of the vehicle through engine gimbaling. So if they turn that off, they might not exactly maintain a true straight trajectory. So let's not get too excited just yet. However, it didn't look nominal. But yeah, in terms of the there is the bigger problem is, of course, the metal if it stays in space, because that becomes a danger to other satellites that are being launched or other rockets that are being launched, because basically if you hit another piece of debris, like, that's basically game over. So it's much better that you send these things into the ocean than leaving them in space. Yeah, the ocean's pretty big, and yes, it is technically a pollution problem because you're dropping things into the ocean, but in the end, it's not the worst, you know. There's way more worse things that we put into the ocean that we should be more concerned about. But yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the status of the vehicle right now. We lost all telemetry. They took off the speed and the altitude, and it lost the altitude at about 6,800 meters per second, which means that it didn't have orbital velocity yet. And although we were close to the final altitude, so this is definitely concerning. The velocity dropping is not so much of a concern because the rocket was still ascending on its way into the final altitude. So it could be that it actually shut its engine off and was going to do a circularization burn at apogee, and that's why the speed indicator was going down. But nonetheless, usually they try to do this all in one burn. So we'll have to wait on the update, and they may be outside of the range of the ground station. So keep that also in mind. That's actually a good point. Oftentimes these rocket stages actually just end up being like the feeder things for reefs and stuff. So sometimes they actually are good for the oceanic environment, depending on what they're made out of. Usually steel and aluminum are not so bad. It's the carbon fiber that tends to be the worst pollutant for the environment, because they have all these chemicals inside the epoxy and in the carbon fiber itself that can cause, pollutants to be released into the environment. But when it's just metal, basically it just oxidizes, rusts, and makes a good artificial reef. They even sink like battleships and stuff to do this kind of stuff, and that's way more metal than a rocket. So yeah, there aren't any chemicals that are explicitly dangerous that are in the rocket, especially a rocket like this, because it's just liquid oxygen and kerosene as the fuel. So it's literally, the ocean's made out of oxygen. That's what's in water. And kerosene all of that is mostly burnt up by the time it comes back. So really it's not a chemical issue. It's mostly just the metal itself that's falling into the ocean that's the environmental issue. And the main danger that is like around the rocket going into the ocean in the first place is actually that it's a pressurized tank. So you don't want it around people because the pressurized tank, of course, could explode. So that's like the main danger of the whole falling into the ocean problem. It's not necessarily the environmental impact of the metal itself, you know. Unless your rocket is running on some other chemicals, like if you have a rocket that's working on hypergolics, that can be more of a problem.
We had a nominal first stage flight. However, the upper stage engine did shut down early, and we did not deliver our payloads to orbit. We will end the broadcast here, and thank you for sticking with us today.
Thank you to ASTRA for partnering with NASA Spaceflight to help bring live launch coverage to you, and stay tuned for more news coverage. But that wraps up our coverage for today. Thank you all for watching.
Okay, so it looks like they had a problem with that second stage. It did shut down early, as we suspected. So that's a bit unfortunate. Yeah, basically we could tell that was probably an issue because of the uncontrolled spinning that was happening. And that just basically means the engine's off. Of course, if the engine were on, it's able to control that spin by its thrust gimbaling that it has. So it will be curious to see why that happened, but we'll see. But I guess they still have 4 satellites left, so it's not like the entire whole mission is a complete loss for NASA. And I'm sure like these satellites are small; they're just three units. They're like the standard sizes for these CubeSats. So it's 3 of them. So it's basically a box that you could definitely put on this table right here. So I'm sure that they can build a couple more of those, no problem. It is a bit of a bummer for ASTRA that they weren't able to get this payload to orbit, though, because it kind of is looking similar to the problem they had before. Although it's not the same, it has nothing to do with the payload the payload fairing deployment or the second stage being shot off. It's because of the shutdown, the early shutdown of the engine. So it'll be curious to see why that occurred. How often do launches like this fail? Well, for ASTRA, I would say it's about 50-50 right now. They don't have a very good track record yet of doing launches, and again, this is a new rocket. It's still in development pretty much, so at the moment it's 50-50 with their launches. In the last 4 launches they've had, they've lost 2 of them. So it's not going to be an igniter problem because the rocket engine did ignite. It's going to be a problem with probably the fuel system or the pressurization system, I suspect. If they had any issues there with a leak or something, that could have triggered a shutdown of the engine. Basically, the engines shut themselves down if there's any sort of like off nominal behavior, and that if there is something wrong, it's usually something to do with like pressurization or like a fuel leak or something like that would threaten the continued operation of the engine. That's usually why these automatic systems will trigger a shutdown. And that's basically to prevent the rocket from going somewhere it shouldn't. You don't want a rocket out of control and then all of a sudden landing in a place where there's people, right? So these are why these automatic systems are in place to do that. Yeah, what's going to happen to it now? Well, because it almost got into orbit, it's probably going to go pretty far. So I suspect it's probably going to land either somewhere way downrange, which is going to be somewhere way down deep in the Atlantic Ocean, or because it's on this 30-degree inclination, it's probably going to end up somewhere, if it really goes far downrange. I don't know how far exactly it's going to go, but it might actually end up somewhere in Africa, in the desert somewhere. Yeah, if it lands on land, that's never good, because then could be a risk that people are in the way. But I suspect most of its trajectory is over unpopulated places, so it probably won't be an issue in the end. ASTRA should help for help publicly. I'm not sure there's much that the public could give to them right now. They would have to definitely share more about what their problems are for us to help from the public perspective. Like oftentimes these problems are like something that's super specific to a system that they're working on, that unless they shared that, like we couldn't really, help them in any way. We can kind of look at their video and stuff and see, oh, maybe this happened, maybe this happened. Maybe if you're like Scott Manley, you can dissect it and maybe provide a little bit of help. But for the most part, they have way more information to be able to figure out what went wrong than we do. So, yeah, I'm not sure there's much we can do to help. Yeah, don't be discouraged. This is the rocket is in development. The rocket is something that's still being tested, and they're still coming up with fixes and trying out launching again. So, you know, for the next year or two, this is kind of the way rockets are. If you think back to when SpaceX was developing their rockets, like, they weren't having success every time. They had some failures at the start as well, similar to this. Their first, like, of the first 4 launches they did, 3 of them failed. So, and they failed in like big ways, like explosive ways. So again, this is not something to be like super worried about at this stage for Astra as a company, I would say. And yeah, it's an important part of the process, because, you know, if you don't fail, you'll never know where your problems are, and you won't develop a rocket that ends up being really, really efficient and working well. And, you know, for the Falcon 9, it's been through that process, and now it's a rocket that works really, really, really well, and it does its job really well. But it wasn't always that way. It had lots of failures at the beginning as well. No, Astra should ask SpaceX and engineers publicly. Yeah, maybe SpaceX could help, because, you know, I guess they've been through this process before. You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if there's some communication channels there, because, I mean, these rocket companies communicate and they share engineers. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had some communication lines open. They were talking about these types of things. I hope it's not anything to do with Chinese micro switches. I mean, yeah, they should learn their lesson. Don't buy from China. They're unreliable. Yeah, the pop that you saw was basically the engine going out. So it wasn't like there wasn't an explosion. I think the engine just shut down. And the vehicle started spinning because the upper stage vehicle it's stabilized by the gimbal of the engine. So basically, as soon as the engine turns off, it no longer has any stabilization ability. So it just will spin with whatever rotational speed it had right before the engine cut out. That's the rotational speed it has now forever. So that's the struggle of a system that is strictly controlled by the engine gimbal, and you don't have any reaction control thrusters or anything to help stabilize the system. Is that, well, if you have this engine out situation, you kind of can't recover. Yeah, SpaceX crashed without expensive payloads. I don't know. They had some expensive payloads on board as well, because they were also launching real payloads when they were working with the Falcon 1. And I would point out that the Tropics payloads are not exactly super expensive. So they're like NASA's attempt to try and make satellites for more efficient costs, and also have them do really cool things, but not with the huge budget of a typical satellite. Which is why they actually contracted Astra in the first place, is because, you know, they offer launches for $2.5 million, so it kind of fits into that general strategy. Yeah. What kind of science do I work at? I am a rocket engineer, so I'm actually in my final year of space engineering at the University of Bremen. And yeah, right now I'm the chief engineer at ASTRA EV, which is a student group at the University of Bremen, which is trying to build a rocket that goes to the Kármán line. So we're also in the rocket building business, and we kind of share a name with ASTRA, and that's kind of why we like streaming this launch. And I kind of like streaming them as well, because they're a program that's in development, and it's cool to see a rocket come together from the very start. So even though they don't have success every single time, and they have small failures and some big wins as well, it kind of is a little bit more like the real rocket development, you know? It's not like these rocket launches that are already, 20 years into development and already have their systems fully figured out and stuff, right? That's not the exciting part. That's the part when, you know, things are calm and comfortable. Yeah, so yeah, that's some of the work that we're working on. Right now, the system we're trying to develop is a hybrid system. So it's going to use paraffin wax and nitrous oxide. And we're trying to build a rocket that goes to space. So that's probably what primarily consumes my time right now, is developing, working with the 60 engineers that are in that group, developing that rocket. Yeah, I'm glad that I can be able to stream these launches and kind of share a little bit about rocketry and rocket engineering, and hopefully answer some questions that are confusing about the rocket industry in general. Yeah, what type of data do they capture beyond the camera and the telemetry? A ton. Trust me, a ton. Number one, they have definitely pressures from all of their tanks, the oxidizer tank, the fuel tank, also probably the pressurization tank. I'm sure they have readouts on all of the pumps and the speeds of the pumps they're spinning at, the pressures that they're working at. They have temperature sensors in the combustion chamber, pressure sensors in the combustion chambers, all 5 of them. There's 5 rockets on this thing, so they're all giving readouts. Plus the rocket on the upper stage is also giving readouts on that. They also are going to have things like attitude, altitude. They're also going to have information on the payloads with respect to vibration and sound. I know there's no sound in space, but there's going to be like sound energy and pressure energy that's being transmitted through the actual thrust of the engine. They're also going to have other things like acceleration, velocity, of course, we already had in the stream, but other little pieces of information that they can use to try and figure out what's going on. And I'm sure they have other sensors on there too that are helping them diagnose things at this stage because it's such an early program. So really they have way more, and there's really not much we have to go on with just the camera and, you know, the velocity readout. As much as we can kind of be armchair rocket engineers, they definitely have the cooler tools. Yes, failure is the mother of invention, and I'm sure that this failure will be informing what they do next. I'm almost positive about it, and I'm really confident that this failure is something that's going to probably reveal something that they needed to change anyway, because, I mean, if it happens once, it's going to happen again. And yeah, I'm sure they're going to refine the second stage a little bit more. Just from the outside, it looks like maybe they might need to think about putting some more stabilization onto the second stage, because clearly they've had the spinning out of control happening more than just once now. And maybe having just the engine gimbaling as the control for the rocket is not enough. But we'll see. I don't know if it's really... Maybe they don't see it that way, and maybe they think that's basically the key is to make sure the engine doesn't shut down again. Of course, that would be the ultimate fix. Do we have any rocket experience in failing and overcoming it? Me specifically, I have not gotten to the point where I've had a rocket, like the propulsion part of a rocket fail. We're actually in testing right now though, and we've just been testing our recovery system a few weeks ago, and our initial tests were pretty much a complete failure. So we had to diagnose the failure in that case with the data that we had available to us. And we're going to be testing that again tomorrow with an upgraded system. So we're hoping that that testing will go well. We'll have some updates on that on our channel in case you're interested. And we have a video about the entire first campaign of testing for the recovery section, which you can, which I'll put into the description and probably put it into a card somewhere in this video as well, once we upload it after the stream. Definitely good to check out that, because again, it's documenting more of this, you know, failure analysis that you have to go through as a rocket engineer. can we extrapolate the splashdown point? Yes, we can. You definitely could. We knew what the altitude was. We knew what the position was. We knew what the velocity was. And we don't really know exactly what the orientation of it was, but we can probably put a good, thumbnail guess on that. And we could actually plot what the position of the landing point is. So if you're really up to do a little bit of trajectory analysis, all the power to you. I would welcome you trying to figure out that answer. I can't figure that out right now in my head, but I suspect that based on my general experience with trajectory analysis, that it's probably going to end up somewhere way downrange in the Atlantic Ocean or somewhere in the Sahara Desert. But we will see if that's actually where it ends up. If it does go further than that, it'll essentially end up in the Indian Ocean, which is where everything ends up anyway, so not too much of a big deal. Should have used SpaceX. Well, if they had used SpaceX, that actually wouldn't really work very well, because they were trying to go into an orbit which was 30 degrees inclined, and SpaceX hardly ever launches to that orientation. They're basically launching usually into sun-synchronous orbit or a geostationary orbit or into one of the orbits that the Starlinks are going into, which isn't that one. And if they would have had to ride share the Tropics missions, basically they would have ended up in a situation where they basically couldn't do a ride share. And that's not really ideal. So unfortunately, it didn't make sense from an economic perspective for NASA to build the Tropics mission in a way where they could do a ride share with a SpaceX launch. And that's why they ended up on ASTRA. So with ASTRA. And that's essentially what ASTRA's market is for satellites which want to go to weird orbits, but it doesn't make sense to do a ride share and make those plane changes, because they really take a lot of delta velocity, which would mean you have to build your satellite way bigger and have these like huge propulsion systems on them. And it just doesn't make sense. The only other rocket that could maybe have taken them was Rocket Lab, but they're way more expensive. Like it cost $7.5 million per launch. So to launch these 6 satellites, it would have cost them 3 times as much as with ASTRA. So maybe it's even cheaper, even with the failure, to just build a new one and launch with another rocket. Like literally, they would have to have 2 out of every 3 rockets fail before Rocket Lab became more economic. So it really depends on the mission, and in this case, it just, from a technical standpoint and from a cost standpoint, it just makes more sense to put them into orbit with the Astra vehicle. Why would it come down? Is 500 kilometers not already in orbit? Yes, that is space. That is space, but when you're in orbit, you have to be going at a specific velocity, and the velocity that it needed to get to was about 7,800 meters per second. And when its engine shut down, it was only at 6,800. So it was about 1,000 meters per second short of the target velocity that it needed to get to. And basically, if you're not going fast enough, instead of going all the way around the Earth, you're in an orbit which is just taking you a little bit too short. So you end up kind of just falling into the ocean instead, unfortunately. So that's what happened here. Although they are in space, it's only in space for a little bit unless you get up to that orbital velocity. So that's why they had to keep the engine going. Is it still cheaper now that the rocket failed? That would depend on how much those Tropics satellites cost. I suspect they probably cost on the order of tens of millions. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say it would be close. If you really put the costs together between it and Rocket Lab, assuming Rocket Lab's launch didn't fail, which, by the way, they also have failed launches, so it's not like if you put them on a Rocket Lab launch, it's for sure not going to fail. But yeah, usually after the launch failure, it tends to be cheaper to go on something that obviously didn't fail, but I think it would still be tight because Rocket Lab is just 3 times more expensive. So yeah, the amount that they save is about $5 million per launch right now with Astra. So even if each satellite costs $10 million to make, it's still almost comparable to if they had a perfect launch record on Rocket Lab launches. But yeah, it's more complicated than that. I'm kind of simplifying the math there. And if they had insurance involved, there could be other things they're thinking about, because maybe they had a deal with insurance that, and their insurance coverage was less than the cost of the satellites. So who knows? It's a very complicated world, the world of rocket failures. Although I suspect that the payloads were not insured, because I'm not sure there's an insurance company that would give insurance for Astra right now, because there's just no track record yet. So they have no idea what the real failure probability of an Astra launch really is. I mean, it could be 50-50, but it could be way less than that. So they kind of need some more launches before you can really start insuring things, I think. But I don't know. I'm not a rocket launch insurance agency, so maybe they do have insurance. Yeah, Pixar didn't happen is actually one of the Rocket Lab launches that failed. So, yeah, that was also a unfortunate situation. But just goes to show you that, it's not just Astra that experiences these issues. Although Rocket Lab does have the Electron vehicle is more of a experienced and developed vehicle, so they tend to have less failures than the other than Astra. But Astra will develop, and in 3 to 4 years they'll probably be just as experienced as Rocket Lab, and they'll probably have a failure rate that's probably more comparable to that. But yeah. Anyways, the basic summary is, yes, the Astra launch did end in a failure today, unfortunately. There was an early shutdown of the second stage engine, which means that it was unable to achieve the target velocity that it needed to get into orbit, although it did reach the target altitude. So it did get there briefly, and then unfortunately it's going to be coming back down. Yeah, so at this point, it's now a matter for between NASA and Astra. So this was, of course, a mission that was bought by NASA in order to get those Tropics satellites into orbit. They were going to be going up to do some weather monitoring and getting some more data on tropical storms. But unfortunately, that's the first 2 satellites at least are not going to get there. But there are still 2 more launches that are scheduled on Astra rockets for these Tropics missions. So we still have 4 more satellites to launch. Hopefully they'll go more successfully this time. And I'm sure that within some months, they'll probably have 2 more satellites built so that they can once again send them as well. Although it's unclear whether Astra will be sending those. Yeah. Anyways, it's important to note that failure is not meaning that that the whole rocket is bad or that it's never going to work. It's just really part of the process for developing a proper system. Without failure, it's really hard to identify the problems that are on the rocket, and this really gives the engineers a point from which they can start to re-engineer the system so that they're not going to experience these types of failures again. So definitely be listening in for the next couple of days on what exactly went wrong. We might do a video about it, although I'm not sure. It depends on how much time I have to put that together. And yeah, we're hoping to have them come back to the launch relatively quickly. They were back to launching quite quickly after the other failure that they had. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Anyways, guys, it's been great to have you here for the launch. It's definitely been a long one. They went all the way to the end of the launch window, so it was great to have all of your questions, and I hope that you guys stay curious and keep asking those questions, because that's ultimately going to be what starts getting you more curious and maybe getting you into the world of rockets and space technology, which is what we want, because the more people we have in it, the more developed it's going to get in the future. So yeah, thanks a lot for sticking around, and I hope you have a great finish to your weekend. And I hope that you also remember to keep expanding your horizons.